For many, crying is synonymous with weakness. However, crying is something natural for human beings. In fact, when a baby is born, its first sign of life is crying. Crying is part of our essence. It is part of our life. We cry when we are sad, but we also cry when we are immensely happy. We cry out of longing. We cry out of love. Crying is part of our nature. And just as it is part of our nature, it is also part of God's nature. Yes, God also cries because he has feelings. In the Bible, in John 11:35, there is a short but profound verse. Jesus wept. This shows us that the God we serve is an emotional God. He gets emotional and he cries. When Lazarus died, Jesus saw Martha and Mary crying, along with those who were around. Then, the Bible pauses and reveals this scene to us. Jesus wept. But Jesus' tears were not a cry of helplessness or impossibility. He did not cry because he could not resurrect Lazarus. On the contrary, he already knew that Lazarus would be resurrected. Jesus' tears were motivated by a single word: love. Jesus cried because he loves us so much. He cried because it is part of his essence. The Bible tells us that he cannot resist a broken heart. He gets emotional when he sees us crying. And that is what I want to talk to you about. I had a very powerful experience with God. I remember one day when I was preparing to preach at a youth conference. I was at the radio station where I work, talking to God and asking him to guide me and give me a word to speak to people's hearts. Suddenly, God's presence invaded the studio. His glory filled the room, and I began to cry intensely. At that moment, I asked, "Lord, why didn't I feel your presence before as I do now?" It was then that the Holy Spirit showed me the answer. He took me back to my room when I was 15 years old. At that time, I was far from God's ways. I didn't want to know about him or even hear about him. And then I had a vision. I saw the scene from when I was 16 years old. I was lying in bed, facing the wall, completely far from God. But next to me, there was a being dressed in white. He sat on my bed and began to cry. His crying was deep and painful. I could hear every cry. It broke my heart. Then the Holy Spirit told me, "You didn't feel me before because you didn't want to hear me." That was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. I had the privilege of hearing the Holy Spirit cry. He cries for me, and he also cries for you. That is the most beautiful thing in our lives, a God who cries, a God who gets emotional, not because he is incapable of acting, but because he loves you so much that he becomes sad when you are far away. If he cries for you, what will you do now?